Welcome to the debate. Today, we are examining the biblical mechanics of generosity. Specifically, the intricate relationship between financial sowing, spiritual protection, and, well, material abundance as it's presented in our source text.
Right, and the central question we are confronting today is really about the nature of this promise. Is the spiritual promise of financial overflow fundamentally like a structural law requiring adherence to specific mechanics, namely tithing and offering?
Exactly. Or is this dynamic entirely governed by the internal posture of the believer's heart?
Yeah, that's the core of it.
So I argue that the text lays out a very concrete two-tier structural law of sowing and harvesting. Basically, tithing guarantees a baseline of blessing, and offerings mechanically generate abundance.
And I counter that the text explicitly subordinates all those mechanical actions to internal motives. I mean, without a contrite heart and the desire to bless others, the specific amounts and rules of tithing or offering are just spiritually void.
Okay, so let me begin by establishing the foundational architecture of the text's premise, because the structural mechanics here are, well, they're quite specific.
They definitely draw a hard line.
They do. The source material presents this highly structured, two-tier system of financial giving. It draws a definitive line between the tithe and the offering. These are not synonyms.
Right, they aren't used interchangeably.
Exactly. They are two distinct, complementary actions with vastly different functional outputs. The text asserts that tithing operates as a baseline mechanism. Think of it as a structural floor.
Okay.
When you tithe, you are fundamentally securing your finances against sudden collapse. It essentially establishes a protective perimeter around your assets.
Well, protection is an important element of the text. I'll give you that. But presenting it as a mechanical perimeter makes it sound, I don't know, like an insurance policy?
Honestly, functionally, according to the text, it operates very much like one. I mean, it acts as a protective measure against unforeseen, catastrophic expenses.
Like what?
The text explicitly mentions everyday disasters. Cars suddenly breaking down, or family members falling ill and incurring massive medical bills. The tithe is the specific mechanism that guards against those baseline erosions of wealth.
Right.
But that is only the floor. The offering is the removal of the ceiling. The text explains that offerings go a critical step further to actually generate abundance.
Yeah, but
Just to finish the thought, there is an explicit mathematical rule laid out here. One must, quote, offer more than you tithe, because that is what God will multiply.
I know the line, but
This is not abstract poetry. Generosity is described literally as a seed for future financial overflow, operating on this reliable structural law of sowing and harvesting.
okay.
You tithe to secure the ground, but you must sow with your offering in order to multiply the crop. It is a concrete system of spiritual physics.
See, focusing on the structural mechanics entirely misses the psychological and spiritual core of the text.
How so?
Well, my perspective is that the power of the offering is located exclusively in the heart, not in the mathematics of the donation or, the specific sequence of events.
But the sequence is laid out so clearly.
Sure, but if this were truly just a mechanical law of physics, the denomination of the bill wouldn't matter, provided the percentage or the ratio was correct. I mean, the soil wouldn't care how the farmer feels, right?
Right.
Just as physical soil doesn't care if a farmer is angry or joyful when they drop a seed. But the text clearly implies God does care.
The text clearly states that the amount matters, though. Like I said, it explicitly says, offer more than you tithe.
It sets a guideline, yeah, but then it severely undercuts the mechanical nature of that guideline by issuing these profound warnings.
Warnings about what?
About the danger of giving purely out of obligation, fear of judgment, or social competition. The text gives this incredibly vivid example of someone pulling out a $50 bill simply because they saw someone else give a 20.
Oh, right.
They are following the math. They are giving an offering. But the text makes it clear that giving to compete or giving to test God without a foundation of profound gratitude yields absolutely no fruit.
I see where you're going.
The math is perfect, but the crop fails. Why? Because a mechanical approach to giving completely nullifies the so-called law. God prioritizes a sincere, humble heart over specific denomination amounts.
What?
If the structural math was the primary driver, internal hesitation wouldn't register as a failure of the system. But the text states that God notices when you change your mind and decide to swap the bill in your pocket for a smaller one.
Yeah.
He knows if you are giving everything you have or just what is left over. The motive dictates the outcome, which renders the structural mechanics completely dependent on the heart.
Okay, you brought up the idea of testing God, and I want to zero in on that,
Sure.
because it actually reinforces the structural argument, in my view. You suggest that testing God without gratitude yields no fruit. However, the source material explicitly quotes Malachi 3.10, where God specifically invites believers to test him with the tithes,
He does say that.
promising to pour out blessing upon you until it overflows. The text actually demands that we test the mechanism.
Right, but let me clarify how I see this working. Consider an agricultural analogy based on the text's own language of sowing and harvesting. Tithing is fundamentally like securing and fencing off fertile soil.
Mm-hmm.
It prepares the ground and protects it from external threats. But the offering is the actual seed you plant in that soil.
Okay, I follow the analogy. Both steps are structurally required to achieve a harvest that can overcome financial stress. You cannot plant a seed in concrete and fertile soil without a seed yields nothing.
True.
So when the text tells us to offer more than you tithe, it is providing a structural directive for financial multiplication. The heart matters, yes, but a good heart without the seed still produces no harvest.
Are you suggesting this is a literal transactional formula?
Well,
Because if we treat this as a pure, if A, then B mechanism, secure the soil, plant the seed, get the harvest, we ignore the glaring counterexamples provided right there in the text.
what counterexamples?
The material explicitly addresses people who try this exact structural method but do it without faith or with a transactional mindset.
Oh, I know the ones you mean.
Yeah, these are the individuals who diligently pay their 10 parts simply because God says so, or out of a fearful obligation that they are robbing God if they don't. They follow your structural directive to the letter.
Right, but the text notes that they often end up frustrated because they are missing the corresponding offering or their offering is smaller than their tithe.
It goes much deeper than the ratio of the offering, though. They end up complaining that nothing happens, that the money isn't multiplied, and that they still don't have enough to cover their expenses.
They do say that.
They walk away saying it's a lie. This proves that generosity isn't a transactional formula to escape financial stress. The text emphasizes a profound paradox.
Which is?
It only works when the giving is done without expecting anything in return. That paradox is the core of the issue here. The structural law of multiplication only activates when the giver abandons the transactional expectation of the multiplication.
Let's unpack that paradox because honestly, it sounds like a contradiction.
How so?
How can the text invite believers to test the promise of overflow while simultaneously demanding they expect nothing in return?
Because human psychology and spiritual laws are heavily intertwined here. When someone gives transactionally, putting in $1 to get 10 back, they're attempting to maintain control over their financial reality.
Right.
They are making themselves the focal point of the exchange. The act isn't generous. It is an investment strategy driven by anxiety or greed. True generosity, according to the text, requires the total release of control.
So it's about shifting the focus.
Exactly. It demands a shift from financial anxiety to profound gratitude. The structural law you are defending only functions when the believer completely short-circuits their own self-interest. The moment you pull up the calculator to see if God is paying out dividends, the seed dies in the soil. The detachment from the outcome is what makes the soil fertile, not the mathematical percentage of the tithe.
I see your point. But detaching from the expectation of a return doesn't negate the existence of the mechanism itself. I mean, gravity works whether you understand its mechanics or whether you jump out of an airplane expecting to fly.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
The text acknowledges that believers who give correctly, who align their actions with these principles, do see miracles. They see their groceries last double or triple the time.
Yeah, it does say that.
The text is very clear that adherence to the structure alters material reality. But let's look at the maintenance of this reality, moving from the planting of the seed to its ongoing protection.
Okay.
Because giving the money is really just step one. The text heavily emphasizes that believers must actively maintain spiritual protection over their sown financial harvest.
You are bringing in the plagues mentioned in Joel and Malachi.
Yes, exactly. The text states that after planting your seed, you must water it, fertilize it, and take care of it against specific destructive forces.
Right.
It lists agricultural plagues like swarms of locusts in various stages of development, and specifically what it calls the devourer. These are forces that ruin the harvest.
Sure.
And according to the text, the tithe is what rebukes this devourer. This implies active, ongoing structural maintenance of one's finances and faith. If a believer doesn't maintain this structural discipline, the devourer consumes the harvest.
So you see it as asset protection.
To me, this proves that the mechanics matter deeply. It is an active, ongoing system of spiritual asset protection. You have to actively guard the seed, which implies that a structural failure leads to a material failure. The devourer isn't just a metaphor for bad feelings. It is described as an active force of financial entropy.
Well, let's examine what actually invites or repels this so-called devourer. You are framing this protection as a separate mechanical ritual. It's almost like applying a spiritual pesticide to a crop.
That's one way to picture it.
You pay your 10%, and the pesticide is sprayed. But the text suggests that this protection isn't a formulaic incantation. Protection is naturally sustained by the believer's ongoing gratitude and their behavioral choices.
Behavioral choices?
Yes, specifically, their refusal to engage in wasteful spending. The text points out that the world heavily criticizes tithes and offerings, but completely ignores mundane, wasteful spending like vices and luxuries.
That's true, but the text attributes that worldly criticism to the power of darkness trying to deny believers their blessing by tricking them into abandoning the structure.
It does, but look at the mechanism of the decay itself. The devourer isn't a literal bug that lands on your bank account because you forgot a mechanical step in a ritual.
What is it then?
The devourer is often our own misalignment, our vices, our luxuries, our lack of gratitude. The protection of the seed isn't achieved by a formula. It is achieved by a consistent heart posture of love, sacrifice, and financial discipline rooted in faith.
I'm not sure I agree it's just about discipline.
Think about how this works practically. When a person gives from a contrite heart, they are simultaneously aligning their daily behaviors with gratitude. A person deeply grateful for what they have does not engage in reckless, impulsive spending.
Well, ideally.
They don't buy things they don't need to impress people they don't like. That psychological alignment naturally repels the plagues of wasteful living. The devourer is rebuked by the heart's transformation, not by a mathematical transaction.
I have to challenge the idea that the devourer is merely a metaphor for our own bad spending habits.
Why?
The text doesn't say, if you tithe, you will learn to budget better and thereby avoid financial ruin. It explicitly says that God is the one who rebukes the devourer on our behalf when we tithe.
Right.
I will rebuke the devourer for you. That suggests an external force of financial entropy that requires divine intervention triggered by our obedience to the structural law.
And
let's look at the tangible results of this obedience as described in the material. When we talk about overcoming financial stress, the text is remarkably literal and practical.
literal in what sense?
Literal in the sense that it claims physical objects stop deteriorating at their normal rate. It states that for those who give properly, their cars don't break down, their families are full of health, and when the end of the month arrives, they realize they still have money left over.
Wow. Yes.
Their groceries physically last longer. The ultimate result of generous offerings is a literal personal financial overflow rather than scarcity. The structural law provides a tangible escape velocity from financial ruin. It essentially alters the physics of their everyday life.
I hear you. But by focusing so heavily on the personal financial overflow, the unbroken cars and the leftover cash, we are completely missing the ultimate biblical purpose of this abundance.
The text explicitly highlights these personal benefits as evidence that God makes believers abound, though.
Sure.
If the car breaks down, there is no overflow. The overflow is the proof of the mechanism working.
The overflow is evidence, yes, but the text contextualizes the purpose of that evidence. The text explicitly states that God prospers believers so they can share with your siblings.
Right.
It says, He wants you to have an abundance because with scarcity you cannot bless others. This is a crucial pivot in understanding the entire system.
How so?
The end goal of this generosity, the true purpose of the harvest, is never personal accumulation. It is not about building a bigger silo for your own grain so you never have to worry about your car breaking down again.
Okay.
The overflow is granted specifically to enable the believer to execute good works and bless other people. If we view the mechanics merely as a strategy to ensure our own groceries last longer, we are violating the very heart of the law.
I see.
God gives the abundance so that the believer can become a conduit of generosity to others. The structural laws you are defending are entirely subservient to this communal, heart-driven purpose.
That line of reasoning creates a false dichotomy between personal blessing and communal giving, I think. Why a false dichotomy?
The text doesn't say you are only blessed so you can immediately give it all away and remain in a state of neutral subsistence. It says you reap a harvest that you will be able to share.
Right.
You cannot share what you do not have. Therefore, achieving personal abundance through the structural laws of tithing and offering is the necessary prerequisite for blessing others. The law of sowing and harvesting is what actually produces the excess.
I agree it produces excess, but
Without engaging the mechanics, without securing the soil with the tithe and planting the seed with the offering, you remain in scarcity. And as the text explicitly states, with scarcity you cannot bless others. The structure is what makes the communal blessing possible.
But the structure fails entirely if the intent is selfish from the start. That is the core of the paradox we discussed earlier.
Selfish in what way? Well, if you execute the mechanics perfectly, you give the 10%, you offer the extra above that, you rebuke the devourer, but you do it solely because you want your own car to stop breaking down and you want financial peace of mind, the text indicates you are operating with the wrong motives.
right.
You become one of the people who say, I knew it, nothing happens. The intent to bless others must precede the harvest, not merely result from it.
Wait, are you saying the intent to give away the harvest must be present before the seed is even planted?
Exactly. God looks at the heart at the moment of the planting. The text notes that God observes if you give out of obligation or to avoid conflict.
Oh, like the example of the man pressured to give by his wife.
Yes, precisely. And if that is the underlying motive, the seed is dead on arrival. The soil rejects it. The mechanical action of dropping money into a plate does not force God's hand to produce a harvest if the heart is closed off to the needs of the community. The text asserts that God ignores the denomination of the bill and looks only at whether the giver's true intent is to joyfully bless others.
Well, to summarize my position in light of this discussion, the source material lays out an undeniable, concrete mechanism for altering financial reality. The biblical sowing principles offer a reliable structure. Tithes secure the baseline blessing and protect the soil from the devourer, acting as a defensive perimeter. Generous offerings act as the offensive seed that God multiplies into actual abundance.
Right.
It is an active system that requires obedience and maintenance, and it results in literal, personal overflow that eventually allows the believer to bless others.
And to summarize my stance, those structural actions, no matter how mathematically perfect or rigorously executed, are entirely empty without a contrite and humble heart.
Yeah.
The system is not a vending machine. God ignores the mathematics if the intent is not rooted in a joyful desire to please God and bless others. Without that internal posture, the mechanical laws simply do not activate, and the promise of abundance remains unfulfilled.
Despite our different angles of approach, I think we have reached a strong point of convergence today.
Definitely.
We both agree that according to this text, operating out of a sense of obligation, engaging in social competition over who gives more, or yielding to worldly criticism completely undermines the spiritual power of generosity.
Absolutely. Whether you view it as a broken mechanism or a corrupted heart, the result is the same: giving that does not yield good fruit.
Right.
The text is very clear that giving just to check a box or giving while harboring resentment or a desire to show off short-circuits the entire process. The psychological and spiritual state of the giver cannot be separated from the act of giving itself.
In the physical world, a seed doesn't care what the farmer's thinking when it is tossed into the dirt. But in the landscape of spiritual generosity outlined in this text, it turns out the soil is always reading your mind.
Beautifully said.
We will leave it to you to decide which holds more weight, the structural physics of the seed or the internal posture of the sower. There is a lot more to explore in this material. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.